and welcome to the Spice Rack. I'm Shannon Spicer, and I'd like to add a little spice to your quilting. This is week 7 of my series, the Spice Rack Sampler. Our block this week is called Blocks and Stars. You can download a copy of this pattern by following the link below in the description. If you're just now joining in on this series, check out my channel to see the other blocks and tutorials. This is a 12-block series of classic blocks that I'm remaking in a modern way. So let's get started. If you've been following along with me in this series, you know that we learned strip piecing and half square triangles using the 4 at a time method. The hourglass blocks in this design will build on that knowledge. And with these, we're going to do the half square triangles 4 at a time that we've done on several other blocks. But then we'll take those and we'll create the quarter square triangles, which is the hourglass blocks. So first we do like we've done several times already. We take these and put them right sides together and start sewing a 1/4 inch in on the upper right hand corner, and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down and around the perimeter till you come back. Okay, here we have the piece that I sewed a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the edge, and it's completely closed, which we do not normally do in quilting, but I'm going to cut it in 2 places so that we will end up with 4 pieces. I can tell my blade is getting a little dull. I need to replace it. It'll be easier on your hands and joints if you use a sharp blade. You won't have to use quite so much muscle. And when we press these open, they are half square triangles. So I'm going to go press all of those open and we will proceed to the next step. Okay, so here we have 4 half square triangles pressed open. And we will not trim them down just yet because we still need to do something else with them. If we take 2 of these, set 2 of them aside, and if I put them together with the dark sides on the opposite sides and line up the center line, watch this, if I peel it back, which is where I'm going to sew my line, we will have a 1/4 square triangle block. It's called a 1/4 square triangle because it's a square and it's made up of 1/4 triangles. 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles to make up the square. And these don't have to be the same exact size. That's okay because there is leeway built in for trimming this down once we're all done. So if you've been following along with me, you know that I don't like to use pins. I try to avoid them at all costs. But sometimes we have an occasion that calls for pins, and this is one of those times. So I'm going to put them right sides together, like I said, with the darks on the opposite sides, and I'm going to make sure that my center seam is completely matched up. I'm just peeling this back a little bit just to make sure that seam is lined up. I don't peel it back all the way, I just peel it back a little bit, and then I place a pin. And then I make sure on the other side that it is matched up. It is. So I'm going to place another pin. I put my pins right about here because we're going to be sewing right down the middle. I don't want my pins to be bumping into my sewing foot. Now with your pieces pinned together, we're going to mark a line down the center. For marking, I really like these friction pens. They're erasable or disappearing ink if you apply heat, like an iron or some sort of friction, like erasing. There's a lot of debate on these. Some people don't like to use them. I only use them on the back of the fabric because if your fabric does get cold, the markings will reappear. But if it's on the back, it should be fine. I don't use them on the front for any sort of quilt marks. Okay, so I'm going to place my ruler from point to point here and mark a line right down the middle. There we go. And then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on one side and a 1/4 inch on the other side of that. Okay, so now we have 2 of these pieces that I marked down the center, and then I sewed a 1/4 inch on each side of that line. You need to cut on the line that was marked. So that's just from point to point. I don't have to line it up exactly on the line. I'm just going to line it up point to point on my block. Cut it apart and do the same with the second one. And now I will go press them open, and we have an hourglass. Okay, so now we have 4 hourglass blocks, or 1/4 square triangles, all trimmed up. And I showed in a previous video the details of trimming, but with a 1/4 square block hourglass, a tip that I have for you is with your square ruler, you'll want to take advantage of that 45-degree line, and then whatever size you are trimming to, find the halfway point. Let's say you're trimming to a 4-inch block. Then you would want to find the halfway point, which is 2 inches, and the intersection of the 45-degree, and line that up with the center point of the hourglass. Your 45-degree angle will line up with this line, and that intersection of the half, the 2 inches or the 2 1/4 or the 3 inches or whatever is the half, will also line up right there at the center. And then you trim off top and side, flip your block around, do it again, and trim off top and side. And with this particular pattern, I've given you plenty of leeway with this because we started out with just the plain squares, and we made the half square triangles and then the 1/4 square triangles. I gave you leeway in case your seam allowances were off a little bit along the way, so this is how much I trimmed off on these. A fair amount, you know, maybe less than a 1/4 inch on each side, but a fairly fair amount to give you leeway for mistakes. And now I'm going to set these aside because we need to make our economy blocks, otherwise known as square in square. What we're going to do is we're going to place them right sides together, and again with my solids, I'm not sure it really matters, but we place one of the small squares in one upper corner and the other small square in the opposite corner, and then mark. I'm not going to pin. You can pin if you want. Like I said, I don't like to pin a whole lot, but I'm going to mark from corner to corner on this particular square, and I'm just being careful not to bump them so I don't shift them around since I'm not pinning. And I'm going to mark this here with my friction pen, and we're going to sew along those lines. So I would prep all of these and get them ready to go and send them through the machine, chain piecing. So I've got 5 of these, but I realized partway through that there's a little tip that I didn't share, and I actually forgot to do. I don't always do this, but if you have problems with thread nests, the thread gets bunched up there at the beginning, the tip for that is to use what they call a leader. I've got it here, just a scrap piece of fabric that you send through the machine first, and then you don't snip your thread, and then you sew what you need to sew. So I'll snip this off, and this is just my scrap that I'll use. This will come in very handy on this block and the next couple blocks, just the way that we're doing these. You don't want those thread nests on the corners. What we're going to do next is trim off a little piece. This method is called stitch and flip because we stitch the line and we flip this open. There's a little waste because we're going to cut this portion of the triangle off and discard it. You can use that tiny piece for something else if you want. So it is a little wasteful, and I hate waste, but it's the easiest way to make these. So I'm going to take my ruler And I'm going to line up a 1/4 inch mark right on that stitching line, and then just trim off the fabric a 1/4 inch away from the stitching. So now we have 5 squares that look like this. I have to recommend once again my favorite tools, the wool pressing mat and the tailor's clapper. As I press these open, I hold the iron on for several seconds, and then I place the tailor's clapper on it. I get a stack going where I just leave it up there, press another one, add it to the pile, put the tailor's clapper back on, press, add, so that the tailor's clapper stays on the stack for a while. You really achieve nice flat seams with both the wool pressing mat and tailor's clapper combo. And that's what you want with this, because you really want it to fill out that square. I'll put links in the description to all these tools that I'm mentioning. So now we will do the same thing we did before with our little squares in the opposite corners. Right side down, place it in the corner, pin it if you want, and we'll draw a line from the corner to the corner. You can use a pencil for marking, or a thin chalk pencil, or not pencil, but a chalk marking tool. I like the friction pens. It's a ballpoint pen. This one is actually like I don't know the name of it. This one is a real small point, a very fine point. And I just lightly draw it on there. I don't really do it very dark. You might be wondering about the overlap. This square overlaps this. You actually do want that because we're going to have a 1/4 inch overlap with these, so that when you join 2 blocks together, the point of the inner square will match other points in whatever design you have. Okay, so now we have 5 of these with all of our squares sewn onto the corners, and we will do the same thing that we did before. We will first trim a 1/4 inch away from the seam, the sewn line. So I line up my ruler and trim that piece off, and then when we flip it open and press it, it's going to look like that. So let's do the other side. Alright, so there's the first one. Let's see, let's do it like this. Finger pressing. It looks pretty good. I'm going to finish these and press them with the iron and show you what they look like. Okay, so they are pressed open, and we have an economy block, square and a square. We have 5 of them. And these do not need to be trimmed down. They are the size that they should be. So now we'll arrange our economy blocks and our hourglasses into the Blocks and Stars block. We will sew our top row together first, and then we will sew the second row, and then the third row, and then attach the top row to the second row, and the second row to the third row. It's a good idea at this stage to backstitch a little bit as you attach these 2 blocks and these 2 blocks, and then backstitch a little bit on your bottom blocks at the bottom as you attach them, and then when you attach each row together, backstitch a little bit in the beginning and the end, and the beginning and the end. That way all of the exposed edges all around the perimeter will have a little extra stitching so that they won't start coming open. So now we have each row sewn together, and I want to show you how I pressed, which direction I pressed. With the hourglass pieces, I always pressed toward the dark side, so when we put them together, they naturally nested. And then with the economy blocks, we were pressing these flaps outward, so this white piece remains flat. So when I did the back side, I decided to keep those flat, so to press these seams inward. And then so this one also goes outward because it's the economy block. So those will nest well, and the same, those are inward. So now I'm going to attach these 3 rows together. Alright, and here we have the fully assembled block. I went ahead on the back, and when I joined each row together, I went ahead and opted for pressing the seams open, because if I wanted to do this direction flat, then we have this piece to go flat would be the opposite. So I couldn't really choose either of them to go flat, so I did open, which was a little tricky. And that's why we have a little bit of wrinkliness here. But once it's layered with the batting and the back, and quilted and washed and dried, and it gets all crinkly, no one's going to notice the difference. No one's going to notice little things like that. As I say, finished is better than perfect. Don't stress over little things, little points that don't perfectly match, pieces that aren't exactly measured the way they're supposed to be. Just enjoy the process, create your quilt with love, and enjoy the finished product. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can download the pattern, like I said, using the link in the description below, and check out my blog to see a few mock-ups I put together with this block, and also read more about this sampler set. Here's a mock-up of what my finished quilt will look like with all 12 of these blocks. Next week, we're going to make the snail trail block, another classic. If you'd like to be alerted when each pattern is released, sign up for my newsletter by following the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think of this block in the comments below.